So our program today is School Days in Massillon. And one of the reasons I'm so excited about it is that one of our own, Rosalind Wilson, is presenting the program for us today. I think that's fantastic. Of course, as you can see on the sidebar, Roz is a retired educator from Massillon, as well as a member of our society. Roz, I'm looking forward to this, so why don't you just go ahead and take it away.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to School Days in Massillon. This program is being presented by the Massillon Genealogy, Local History and Genealogy Society in conjunction with the Massillon Public Library. And I'm really excited to be here. I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself and how I got interested in the Massillon City Schools. I came here in 1976. I was brought here from Akron, called by the principal of Longfellow Junior High. And I fell in love with Massillon, and I've been here, as I said, ever since. When COVID began, I decided I needed to take up a new hobby. So I decided to start collecting postcards of Massillon. I've got some beautiful postcards, and online I saw some postcards of the old school buildings, and I was fascinated by their beauty. And I really wanted to learn more about them. I was fortunate enough, after about 4 years, I started teaching at the old Washington High School. And a gentleman, I'm going to hold this up, you might not be able to see it, but a very kind gentleman, he was a teacher named Cecil Lemon, gave me a copy of this book. And I don't know if you can see it. And it's called A Century of Education. And you can see it's well used. Century of Education, 100 Years of the Massillon, Ohio Public Schools. And it was compiled and edited by, I found out later from the museum, by a former WHS English teacher, Mary Jane Richheimer. So I'd like to credit Mary Jane Richheimer. She wrote this book in copyright 1948. And the 1848 was the beginning of public schools in Massillon. But we'll back up a little bit. We have some lovely slides to show you today. Some lovely pictures, some of the pictures that I have on the postcards. Okay, I think I have to hit got it here before I can go on. I don't want to punch anything I'm not supposed to. So
That includes me.
So our lovely history and genealogy librarian, Christine, is going to get me off of that permission there. Okay. Again, welcome to everybody. I'm so glad to see everybody. We have at least 2 retired teachers from the Massillon City Schools here with us today. Okay. Right.
So just click on the slide and it'll take you to the next one.
Click on the slide and it'll take me to the next one. Okay. All right, here we go. I've learned so much that I'm so excited to share with you about the history of the schools. It all started, well, you'll see. Harlow Chapin, a gentleman I had never heard of before, never seen a picture. He was a teacher. And he came to town with 18 3/4 cents in his pocket, some say, and he wanted to start a school. And I guess that's the way things were done in those days. Well, it was kind of hard to get the school started. People were busy. They told him, nobody's got the money and to start such a thing or the time to start this kind of a thing. And Massillon was only laid out as a village in the winter of 1825 to 1826. And it wasn't long after that Mr. Chapin showed up. Well, after some waiting, finally, the citizens of Massillon decided that they would cooperate and we would have a beautiful school system. Well, this was not a public school at first. You have to understand that this was a private school that was first opened by Harlow Chapin, and something had to pay for his $12 a month salary. So, and he also, as did many teachers in those days, he got room and board. And he boarded, interestingly enough, with a gentleman named Jacob Miller, who was a prominent citizen. And Jacob Miller later on became the grandfather of another prominent Massillon citizen. I'll tell you more about him in a minute. Okay, well, also Harlow, this picture must have been taken in later years because Harlow was considered too young and there were no suitable buildings. He was told to start his school. But James Duncan, prominent citizen, you've heard of him, had a mill. And the mill, I believe, was constructed about 1817. And the mill was for wheat, flour. And as the markets changed, it changed to a distillery. And then other vendors came in, and Mr. Duncan said, okay, I'm not using my mill anymore. Mr. Chapin, why don't you take that for your school? So the first school was in a distillery. Conditions were not ideal. You've seen pictures of little one-room schoolhouses. I have ancestors and other relatives who taught in them. It was a one room, it was 20 square feet, and there was a large open fireplace in the front. But the kids, they couldn't all sit in the front. So the kids were paying, their parents were paying some money for this private education. And the kids in the back would rotate with the kids in the front. And there was just a slab there for them to write on. And, it was not anything like the schools of today, but they were grateful for the education. And the citizens of Massillon have been very generous over the years, as you will see, with providing education for their children. That was about it for that first school. Mr. Chapin only stayed for 2 terms, which I thought interesting, but as I've read, that was kind of common back then, and the teachers moved on. Interestingly enough, Mr. Chapin later married a woman named Hannah Earl, and she was the daughter of a gentleman named Gilbert Thorpe Earl, one of the Massillon citizens who had originally discouraged Mr. Chapin from following his dream. Interestingly enough, I told you I would tell you about Jacob Miller. Jacob Miller's grandson was Frank Baldwin. And Frank Baldwin, you may recognize that name. He and his wife donated, it was a red brick building, I believe, their home. And it was donated for the purposes of being a library and housing a museum. And that's where I'm sitting right now. Okay. Moving on, it's vital to know that Massillon wasn't the first, wasn't the first place in the area to have an active educational system. In the village of Kendall, if you've read the very fascinating book by our Massillon Museum archivist, Mandy Altimus Pond Stall, if you've read that book, you'll see lovely pictures. By the way, there's the mill. It's gone now, and I forgot to tell you that the mill was on the corner of the present, the intersection, of the present First Street Southeast and Charles Avenue Southeast. And you might be interested to know that if you go to see the new construction at Duncan Plaza by the museum, that's the corner where it was. That school, that distillery was exactly there. And I took a picture, but I didn't put it on a slide, but I took a picture. I took a picture of the site. That's where the first concert was, and that's what I was watching at the time. Okay, let's see what we can do if we can advance to the next slide. I think we have a little feedback. Yes, you might need to mute if you might be having a little feedback here. Thank you. Okay, I was telling you about Kendall. Well, there were several buildings in Kendall that were housing educational places of education, and you can read about it in Mandy's book. One was called the L House, and the L House was on the corner of the present 11th Street Northeast and State Avenue Northeast. It's gone now. I had a lot of fun going around and looking at the sites where these schools had been. And the museum provided me with a marvelous map, which I'm going to show to you after our last slide. Please remind me, because you can access that Google map. And on that Google map, you can see the schools listed by era and color coded by era. And you can see some of the pictures you're going to see today on the slides. You'll enjoy it, but I went to see the empty lots, and that was fun too. Gave me a real sense of the history of the Massillon schools. L House was only one. There was a place where the Quakers had a site. As you know, the Kendall was laid out by Thomas Roach, prominent citizen. This was his puppy. And Kendall was absorbed into Massillon, and I have the date here. Sorry, I'll come across it in a second. But it was absorbed into Massillon, but they had already had an education system going, a good, strong one. Okay. Sorry, I have to look at my notes. There are just so many things to tell you. Thomas Roach's wife, Charity Roach, you may be familiar with her. The Roach's home was Spring Hill. Died on August 6th, 1824. And I wanted to do a little bit of research. Charity Roach's school was not a part of Massillon Public Schools. We haven't even gotten to Massillon Public Schools yet. But she wanted, and I would like to read this quote to you from the Richheimer book about why she founded this school. I thought it was very, very kind of her. As you know, the Roaches were Quakers, and women were not allowed to own property at that time. Mrs. Roach had a deal with her husband, Thomas. He farmed merino sheep and had extensive lands in this area after he came from Connecticut from a trading family, but had ships. But anyway, she had a deal with her husband that for every time one of the sheep had twins, she got one. So she got to stash cash, even though she wasn't really allowed to have a property legally at the time. And it was her money that went at her death. She died after he did. And it was her money that formed and I have a quote from her will. And she wanted to found her money to go to the founding of a benevolent institution for the education of destitute orphans, most particularly those of parents who had depraved morals. I thought that was very explicit. And you can see on the right, there was a picture of it was a farm, and it was a farm. The girls were to learn housewifery and the boys were to learn farming. They were to be able to support themselves and be a success in life. And in order to get in, guardians had to write letters of introduction, recommendation, and then they were accepted or not accepted for the school. The school was not in continuing operation. It did go out of operation for a while, and it came back. The site of the school, I'll have to leave that to the exact site of the school. I will have to leave that to our museum archivist. I have the address here, but she'll tell us maybe just a little bit more about it if she can come in and join us later. Massillon went on, and they started have you heard of the concept of a union school? I've seen them around, reading about history of other towns, and I never knew exactly what a union school was. A union school was to be a public school. That was the plan. It wasn't at first, but the first Massillon Union School was founded there we go. Founded in 1848. So that is why the Century of Education was published in 47, celebrating the 100-year anniversary. Now, if you look at the slide, there's some fun things there. Though on the right, you'll see the first Union School, and looks like a pretty beautiful building. And it was I think it was really on the corner of the lot where the present Longfellow, well, it's not present Longfellow anymore, but that site. And they needed a spillover. They housed quite a few grades in the Union School. And the Union School was a brand new concept. And according to many, Massillon, Ohio had the very first in the country. And maybe some of you can speak to union schools. Some of you may know a little bit about the history, and you can help me out. And by the way, anytime you'd like to help me out, please help me out here. The primary school was built to house. It was started in 1854, finished in 1855, and opened. Does anybody happen to recognize that building? I'm looking at you. Does anybody recognize that building? That picture is a treasure we obtained from the museum. That is as it was originally. It later became a residence, and it was on 3rd Street by the Massillon Library. I see somebody laughing. She's recognizing it. And I looked at that. I passed by for years and thought, that was a school. How interesting. And I wondered what it had looked like originally. Well, it was a little different, as you can see. In the center, I just would like to tell you the teaching staff. I'll pause to highly recommend the museum's website. There are so many, Massillon Museum. There are so many photos. They have a Flickr gallery. And I highly recommend that each and every one of you who's interested in the subject, any subject about Massillon history, go there. I have found so many wonderful pictures there over the years. And there are albums, and a lot of these pictures are taken from the albums. One is Massillon School Buildings, and it's got 94 photos for you to peruse. There's another one with less photos. There's one with the kids. And if you are a graduate of Massillon City Schools and would like to reminisce, wow, there are many donations, and the museum is accepting donations of photos. Right now, they're getting photos in from the 50s and the 60s. So the schools you'll see, they don't have modern pictures of the schools. So we're making good use of these today. If you check out what do you call it? Oh, I'm sorry. I was telling you there were many departments in there. There were primary, grammar, the things that we consider a little different today. They were grouped. And by the way, the Union School on the bottom floor in the basement, that was where the janitors were given free room and board for their families. And they're with the boilers. Oh, I don't know if they had boilers then, but I don't think it was too pleasant down there. But the teachers, you can see the teachers there, and they weren't getting very much money. Does anybody recognize the gentleman in the center? Do I have any takers? Any takers? Have you heard of Harvey Elementary School? Yes. Well, that was Thomas Harvey, and he was an early bigwig, I believe, superintendent in the Massillon City Schools, and that was his staff. There are two lovely pictures on the museum website, the staff of the original school in 48, and then there's another one from 49, I believe. You can see them, and I thought that was interesting. I come from a family of photographers, and I guess I asked about these odd looking pictures, pardon me saying so, the poses, and they said, well, I guess that's the way they asked them to pose. But I'm sorry the picture isn't crystal clear, but if you'd like, take a good look at that. The teachers all around Mr. Harvey. Mr. Harvey, by the way, later became very famous. Some of our superintendents here in Massillon became very famous statewide. Mr. Harvey wrote books in his evenings, taught during the day and wrote books and was a principal. He wrote a book called Harvey's Grammar and another one, and I'm not remembering the name, but they were textbooks used around the country. So there is the gentleman in the center. On the left, I started to tell you that was the diploma for the Massillon City Schools for many, many years. I believe till approximately the building of old WHS. Okay, let's move on and see what other goodies await us. Now, the people of Massillon were very generous, as I said, giving money for the schools. The Union School, the first year, was not in the primary school also. They were a subscription school. The parents still had to pay a fee, but then the fee was refunded after the levies were passed. It was only about a year that the parents paid and they got their money back. Now you can see the West Side School here. That's only half of the school. And when this picture was taken in the 40s, that was the half that remained, I guess. And I went to the site, and if you know where the top of the Viaduct restaurant is, it's in that area before you get to it coming from the west side. And it was in two pieces. And this was the part that was still left when Mary Jane Richheimer wrote her book. We have, if you go to the right next, the West Tremont Street School. My mother-in-law went there, and it was originally called the West Massillon Union School. And if I remember correctly, it was not part of Massillon when it was built. Massillon proper. It was a union school, but not to be confused with the Union School in Massillon, which was on the northeast side, which was on the site of what was later Longfellow, much later Longfellow. But people laughed when it was built. They said, we don't need a school over there. Come on, it's in a corn patch. And I love this picture. check out the corn patch. You can see how rural it was. And I have a very exciting picture to share with you later, courtesy of the museum. It was renamed West Tremont School, and you can see the children outside. And in 1876, we have the opening of the Old Stone School. This is one of my favorite slides. In the lower left-hand corner, please see the building that was built because there were so many children in the Union School. It needed, I think it was at 6 rooms in the Union School, I believe, 2 floors plus the basement for the janitor. If you look at that school is classic for that time period. It is beautiful. You can see, you've probably seen pictures of it before, and you can see it's on the site of where Longfellow was. When I came to Longfellow back in the day, I was told that they built Longfellow, and I think it was maybe in front of the school. You see the trees, the gentlemen, prominent citizens who donated the land wanted the trees kept for the comfort of the children. There was a large hall on the 3rd floor, and there were classrooms underneath. And then you can see the addition that was put on later. On the museum's Flickr site, there is a beautiful shot, many beautiful shots, but there's a beautiful shot of the rear of the school, which I think is a real treasure. But we couldn't put everything on here. You'll have to explore for yourself. So the North Street School, there's a shot in 1879, and I enjoy the shots with the kids. Now you look at all those kids, there were 8 rooms plus an addition or 2. Eventually we know what's coming next. Check out the Cherry Street School. It was built in 1888 for the children of that area. The Richville Avenue School was built in 1884. Also the West Main Street School. And we get into a few interesting names here. The East Street School, and on my postcards, my collection, it's stated East Street School. And I thought, well, where the heck is that? Well, it was later renamed Lincoln School. That was a fad that was going around at the time, renaming schools for famous poets, Emerson, Longfellow, famous poets, and obviously Abraham Lincoln. On the right, we have the State Street School. I think these buildings are beautiful. Oak Park was built on the west side for the convenience of the West Siders, as was some of the other schools that we've already seen for the primary children. A picture that really, we're in 1901 now, a picture that really impressed me and really shook me up when I saw that was Franklin Elementary. That was, I think there were 3, but maybe not 2 at least, and Franklin Elementary in 1901. That reminds me, does that remind any of you of any buildings in Akron, Ohio? How about Buchtel College? The site, yes. the site was on the center of Akron U and was the first building. Below, now, the John Hall School was not a public school, but it was, the money was donated for a few years previous for the education of African-American children. And have any of you actually seen this school? Because it's, the building is still there. Has anybody seen it? I know Linda has seen it. That school, I was introduced to it by Jean Adkins, one of our former genealogy librarians, a longtime genealogy librarian. She talked to us about it during a workshop that was given about street directories and how it was called house history. And she mentioned that in passing. And afterwards, I thought, I think I'd like to see this building. It's on Borden on the southwest side. So I found my way over there, and I live on the west side. I had no idea that was there, that historical building. And it was fascinating looking at that building. And I saw Jean there. She had gone over to pick a few weeds, make sure it was kept up. Oh, I'm sorry, by the way, Oak Park it later was renamed Emerson. Okay, my husband took me when I was fairly new in town. He took me around and he showed me the site of Vinedale School, and it was called Bates Printing at the time. It was built in 1905, and it was not in the city limits. It was not a Massillon school at the time. It was a school, but it was later on, the area was annexed in 1929 into Massillon. And the school was later, another school was built to serve those children. And a couple bought the house, and it became a residence. And you can see the picture of the residence as it appears today. Okay, I think you might be familiar with West Brookfield Elementary. The building is still there. It's on Lincoln Way. It's past St. Barbara School. And that it looks pretty much like it did. It does in that center picture. It's a private residence today. And there it is from the rear, little, not so much viewed shot. I've never seen it from the rear until now.
Is that the rear, or is that just how it looks as a residence today?
I believe that is the rear, because I pass it a lot, and somebody needs to correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what it seems to look like to me. Mr. Wilson, would you care to make a comment? I guess not. Okay, Ms. Hill, would you care to make a comment? Okay, anybody else? All right, that's the way it looks to me, Carol. Okay. Harvey Elementary. My husband and I drove by Harvey and the site of Harvey. We live on the west side, as I mentioned, and Harvey was nearby. And I remember seeing that beautiful school, and a friend of mine attended it. It was closed after a number of years, but the building was still there. I think maybe it was active when we moved over there. Now there is a rock. I took a picture, but I didn't include it, I'm sorry, in the slides. But there's a rock there, and there 2 houses were built on the site. You can tell they're more modern, but do stop if on Tremont, I believe it is. And you can go to the site and refer to the interactive map I'll show you at the end. And you can see that, stop and get out and read the plaque on the rock. I thought it was a fine memorial. West Brookfield, by the way, was replaced later, and we'll tell you about that. Here is our star. Well, the North Street School was a star, but here is our star, the Washington High School, the old Washington High School. I mentioned that the Union School was on the diploma for many years, and the students of Massillon outgrew the Unions, outgrew the North Street School, and they built this. And I've read different dates on my different sources, but from the way I understand it, ground was broken in 1913. Another source told me 1912. And it was opened in 1914, is what I believe. And a grand old lady. And I found some beautiful historical pictures, and we couldn't fit them all in the slides, unfortunately, but I urge you, please, to go on the museum website. There are so many albums that it might take you some time to find the school photos. But there are some beautiful historical photos. You can look at the historic dress here and take your guess as to what year you think it is. Would anybody like to guess? I have some that are older, I believe. I do have the museum will show it to you if you get on their site, a picture of the dedication. And boy, would I love a copy of that picture of the dedication of Washington High School. Wonderful picture. Oh, by the way, I'll just say that my room was, if you look at the center, the third floor was smaller than the other floors. It was shorter. There were no lavatory facilities. And my room was to the right, but across the hall. And I had a lovely view of the air shaft. But I think my room might have been a little cooler than some of the other rooms, heat-wise. And we had windows like the windows at Longfellow and Lorne Andrews that pushed out, and you put a little block in there to keep them open. And it was pleasant to a certain extent because of the air shaft. And I always told my students, dress for the weather, layer, because it could be cold in the winter and warm in the summer. Washington High School was a model of modernity. And one time I went down to the office after school, and my room was 306, by the way. I taught foreign language. I went downstairs and I said, I wish I could have talked to you during the day, but I didn't really have any way of talking to the office without leaving my room, which I'm not allowed to do. And the secretary pointed out to me, well, do you know that wooden block that's inset into your chalkboard? And I said, yes. And she said, did you ever wonder what that was for? And I said, actually, yes. She said, there were telephones in there. When the building was opened, I'll say 1914, there were telephones in there. Houses, a lot of them didn't have telephones, but the high school teachers did, which I found very interesting. I'd like to tell you a little story now that I mentioned the secretary. In that conversation after school, she told me that New Washington High School at the time was so modern that everybody wanted to come teach in it. And I was told that there was a teacher from Canton who left Canton to come to teach at the New Washington High School. And I thought, wow, that is interesting. I said, boy, I wish I could have met her. And the secretary told me, well, you can, if I go over to see her again sometime, I'll take you along. And what an opportunity that was. Well, unfortunately, I'd been up all night doing grades, and I'd been working late 2 nights, and I was exhausted. And the teachers would have a little end of the year luncheon and closing faculty meeting. And the secretary walked over to me and said, would you like to come with me? And I thought, I can't drive. No, I'm so tired. I just need to go home. And I missed my opportunity to meet this lady. And I regret that. I regret my husband was working in Canton and I couldn't get a hold of him to leave school and take me. So I didn't have a ride. I have a treasure here for you in the lower right-hand corner. Anybody present graduate from Washington High School? I know I see a few names. That picture was in Washington High School. It looks like the interior shots I've seen of North Street School. That was taken in 1918, I believe, and that's in a science room. Not too many pictures of the interior of Washington High School back then. I asked the museum to please let me have that picture for the presentation. Okay, moving along to the 1920s, we have Edmund A. Jones. It was opened as a multi-grade school. It wasn't just the junior high age kids back then. It had grade school in it, and then it expanded to include 7th and 8th grade and eventually 9th grade. We have Horace Mann Elementary. If you remember Horace Mann Elementary, it was I believe was the first building along by St. Mary's that I saw when I came for my 1976 interview. I would like to share this slide. We are now getting to the magic year of 1923. And we had 2 buildings built. I think they were both originally grade schools, but they housed the older kids. Now, if you remember back to the West Tremont Street School, that was originally the West Massillon Union School. You can recognize the building, appears the same to me. But my son, I sent these pictures to my son because he graduated. He was a Lauren Andrews dragon. And I sent the picture to him, these pictures to my son from the museum. And he said, wow, is that Lauren Andrews I see behind? And the label is actually Lauren Andrews. The new building was built behind the old building. I don't know that they ever changed the West Tremont School's name to Lauren Andrews. I'd have to look into that. I should have, I'm sorry. But you see the buildings that Massillonians knew and loved for many years that housed the 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. Lauren Andrews on the west side on your left, and Longfellow on the site of the Old North School. And by the way, I fell in love with the yearbook pictures in posted on the Massillon Memories through the Massillon Library website. Please go there and have a look. I was so excited looking at the yearbooks, and the yearbooks start. What year do they start? Christine, could you say something about them?
I don't know if they can hear me very well.
Okay, I will relay if you can't hear Christine. They start quite a while back, and I was thrilled to see the pictures of the students. Oh, some of them were so funny.
There was 1905 on there. But I can't
Mhm.
remember if there were,
1905,
how
yes.
far back, but they go up through 1945
Through
on the website.
Through 1945 on the website. They're, being added slowly. I believe it was only 1905 and another year that I first ran, when that's what was posted when I first ran into them. Beautiful. And I believe I was pointed to them by a member of the Genealogical Society. I gave myself a little plug there. Can you possibly pick me out in the upper right-hand corner? That is a shot. I went down to my basement and I dug in some old cardboard boxes. And luckily I found my yearbooks from Lauren Andrews in LA. And there I am in the center of the front row. Back in the day, I believe that was before I knew my husband. Okay, moving on, 1939, and if I read correctly, I read that one of them, Whittier, and I believe it was the same with the others, were built as a part of the WPA project. And we have the lovely Ellie York Elementary, and that was the successor to the Vinedale School. We have Emerson Elementary, which was in my neighborhood, and I passed the empty lot all the time. And we have Whittier Elementary. I know at least two of our viewers today have graduated from Whittier Elementary. And you might notice that Emerson and Whittier appear to be twins. I don't think York comes into that, but it does.
It's a similar style.
Yeah, it's a similar style. Okay, Franklin, that beautiful building we saw, Franklin with the pillars, it was replaced by the new Franklin Elementary in 1957. And I think I went by a school without mentioning its name. I am so sorry. Lincoln Elementary. We have Gorell Elementary. Maybe I didn't miss it. Gorell Elementary. My son graduated from there and had a very wonderful experience there. It's on the west side. The Franklin Elementary is down from the present Washington High School. There's Lincoln Elementary. It was built next to I believe it was the 1966 edition of old WHS, and was used by the school system for other things. It was used as an alternate school for children of all grades. Underneath we see, well, I guess I should go to the right, Bowers Elementary. Sadly, it is gone now. The buildings underwent, because of money issues. Some of them were torn down. This one was not torn down that long ago. And you see LJ Smith, which is still in use, correct me if I'm wrong, as a board office on 17th Street for the Massillon City Schools. Bowers Elementary, I contacted some former staff members, and I was told about, this picture is taken from the Independent, about their Serenity Garden in the center, which they were very proud of. Now we come to more modern day. As you can see, we have Washington High School. The construction was begun in, I believe, 1991, and I believe we moved in 1992. And it was interesting. The school board was anxious to get us into the new building. And that new building was quite an undertaking and was built so that the fire department could know where to go in this giant plant, know where to go in case of a fire. And everything was laid out with letters. And we went to, we gave an open house for the public. Perhaps some of you were there. And they would not tell us where our rooms were. I was a foreign language teacher. I taught French, German, and Spanish, sometimes all at the same time. And it was an interesting experience, and I enjoyed it very much. My room was C205 and near one of the offices, and things were laid out in like a wagon wheel, the different sections. Well, they wouldn't tell us where. They didn't want us being proprietary. So I was put for that in the car shop, the auto shop, where they did repairs, and people would laugh coming through and say, "Oh, is this your room?" No, I didn't look like an auto shop teacher. I wasn't big and burly. And we moved in, and we were happy to be there, and it was beautiful and modern. Massillon Intermediate School, Massillon Junior High. Both the grades were originally an intermediate school. My husband taught there. And then it was turned into a combination junior high and intermediate school when the junior highs were, raised. By the way, speaking of my lovely sources, I'd like to point out that the Massillon Alumni Association was very helpful, and I have a little picture plugging them on our slides. I think everybody knows here that the Paul E. Brown Tiger Stadium was built in 1939. The museum has a wonderful picture of the construction of the Tiger Stadium. It was originally called Tiger Stadium. Then it was, Paul Brown was a quarterback, I believe, on the Tiger team. The team used to play at a field, an athletic field, and it was over by the present, where Jones School was. And then when this was built, WPA project, they moved over here, and it was named Tiger Stadium. It was later renamed for Paul Brown. I guess maybe when it was built, when it was built, he was a quarterback. He played for Massillon.
It was renamed in like the 70s. Is that correct?
Renamed in the 70s. I believe I have that information. I can check. And there you see a picture taken, I believe, the same year. And you can see that, the stadium has grown over the years, adding seating, and then the seating receded a little bit. But it's like a small city. You can fit a small city in that stadium. And if you haven't been to a Massillon football game, I recommend it highly, especially when we play Massillon or when we play Canton McKinley. It gets to be a lot of fun. It's a pageant. The pageantry is amazing. I'll check on the year of that renaming. The alumni website has a history, they call History of the Massillon City Schools, and it was taken from a book by Wilbur Arnold. Wilbur, now passed away, who has now passed away, but he wrote a book about the history of the Massillon City Schools, but this was taken from his, and there's also on the next page of the alumni website, there's a great timeline, and it tells you, it has the addresses of all the buildings where they were, and some of them still are, obviously. It gives the opening, the closing date, the raising date. It is renaming date. It's a precious treasure. Shriver Athletic Field was opened in 24. That's where they previously played. And I don't have a slide of this, but you can see you can see slides. You can see pictures in the on the museum Flickr site. There was a gym on North Street, and I always wondered about that. Well, I believe that the Massillon schools purchased it back when North High School was there, and that was where they had the physical education training for the students of North High School. So physical education was always important in the Massillon schools. And we come to some random reminiscing. Now, I would like to address teachers, citizens, anybody who's been to school at all. If you'd like to share, please, we'll have a time for sharing very soon. We will close the program in a few minutes, and then we'll have some reminiscing. And then if you would like to stay around for some more reminiscing, we would love to have you. This is the class of 1900. Some of the most precious pictures are of the students and of the teachers, and there are too many to show you. But I took this one. You see that they were assembled outside the building, and a lot of the pictures had the teachers with them. I really urge you to go in that site and look at them. Where can you go for more info? Well, the Massillon Public Library. We have the history and genealogy room, and we have a new history and genealogy librarian, Christine Bowman, who has helped me so much with this presentation. I cannot thank you enough, Christine. And the Massillon Museum. And I don't know if Mandy was able to attend, our archivist, Mandy Altemus-Ponstal. They were so helpful, and the WHS Alumni Association was very helpful. And I have a little treat for you. In the lower left-hand corner, check out that bookshelf. That's what our bookshelves looked like at Washington High School. Mine were a beautiful color of mauve, but these are gray. And they sell yearbooks. And I bought my husband, class of 1966, a replacement yearbook there the day I went over to interview the staff at the Alumni Association. It is now housed in New Washington High School. And it's open by appointment. They have hours, but it would be a good idea to call before you just wander over there. It's tucked back there in the that vocational wing. There's a teacher's parking lot nearby. It's near 16th Harsh Street. The sources that I used were Massillon Public Education. It was a book by Wilbur Arnold, and the excerpts history of the Massillon schools can be found on the WHS alumni website. Early Massillon and Lost Kendall by Mandy Altemus-Ponstal. I urge you to read it. It's fascinating. It's one of the history books that you see with the sepia toned pictures that they're popping up around the country. They're very good. And then Century of Education by Mary Jane Richheimer. And the museum archivist, Mandy, found me a picture of Mary Jane Richheimer, and I told you that she was a teacher, an English teacher at the high school. Would never have known that. That came from the Independent. It was when they had the kickoff for the book. Do I sound like a football fan? Okay. Images on the slides, as you can see, Massillon Museum, WHS Alumni Association, Massillon City Schools, The Independent, Spring Hill Historic Home, and oldschools.com. Before we close the formal meeting, I would like to tell you that I had the pleasure of attending a lecture by Eric Myers, retired teacher from Massillon City Schools, art teacher, and he had the drama program for a time. And he was posing as, reenacting as Thomas Roach. And I learned so much, but I had done some volunteering there, but it was magnificent. And the happy news is that they are reopening. They have some good things planned for us. So please go on their website and find out before the activities start, so you can see what's going on. And I imagine there are volunteer opportunities. Exciting things have happened over the COVID closure. Here is the Massillon School Interactive Map, courtesy of the Massillon Museum. And if you click on them, they're listed by era and they're continued. You can see where it says they have the early 1800s and they have like 5 more. You can go through, as I told you, I drove around at the sites, but you can see them here and click on them. And again, there are some pictures if you hit a drop down window.
Thank you for watching School Days in Massillon with Roz Wilson. As a follow-up to the information included in Roz's presentation, if you want to view yearbooks for Massillon High School, you can access these at the Massillon Public Library by asking at the reference desk, and they can assist you there. Yearbooks up to 1945 can also be found online through the Massillon Public Library site or by going directly to massillonmemory.org. The link to the map of Massillon schools that was created by Mandy Ultimus Stahl of the Massillon Museum can also be found on that page, massillonmemory.org. You can also link to all this information and even more via the Massillon Museum website at massillonmuseum.org/schoolhistory. Join us next time for a presentation on historic Massillon churches.